My name is Tessa. I'm 32. And just hours ago, I felt like the world I thought I knew had slipped through my fingers. My parents, the people who were supposed to love and protect me, pushed my son and me off their yacht. Yes, you heard that right. One moment, I was standing on that deck with my heart racing, trying to keep my son from panicking, and the next we were in cold, churning water, staring at the small yacht drifting away. My son's tiny arms clung to me, trembling, and for the first time, I realized that the people I trusted most could be capable of calculated cruelty. Before I go further, I want to ask, where are you watching from? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories on family drama and emotional courage. It all started with a phone call that sounded harmless enough. I remember the morning clearly. The sun had barely risen over the marina, casting soft golden streaks across my kitchen window. My phone buzzed on the counter, displaying my mother's name. I paused, feeling a flicker of anxiety. Mom and Dad rarely called just to talk. They usually had an agenda. I swallowed, picked up, and forced my voice to sound casual. "Good morning, Mom," I said, keeping my tone light. "Tessa, darling." Her voice cooed, soft and almost warm, a tone I hadn't heard in years. "How would you and little Jamie like to join us for a weekend on the boat? Just a small trip. Nothing fancy. A little fresh air and family time." I hesitated. My son, Jamie, was 7, bouncing on the couch behind me, immediately perked up. "Boat trip? Can we, Mommy? Please," he begged, his eyes sparkling with excitement. He didn't know my parents like I did, didn't know the way their smiles sometimes felt like a mask hiding something sharper underneath. I sighed, trying to weigh the risks. "I'll think about it," I said carefully, glancing at Jamie. He was already running to get his jacket, imagining adventures on the water. "Think fast, dear," my mother said lightly, almost teasing. "We leave in a few hours. It would be nice to see you both." The line clicked dead, leaving me with a chill that I tried to ignore. By mid-morning, I was driving toward the marina, Jamie in the back seat chattering about dolphins and pirates. The air smelled faintly of salt, tires squeaking on the damp asphalt as I navigated the lot. I tried to focus on Jamie's excitement, but the knots in my stomach tightened. I had learned over the years to notice subtle shifts in my parents' behavior. Dad's quiet, inspecting gaze, Mom's soft sighs when they expected obedience. These were the moments that had made me wary my entire life. The yacht was modest, no luxury yacht fantasy here, just a small weekend vessel, white-painted and bobbing gently in the marina. Nothing about it screamed wealth, which made it even more sinister somehow. I could almost feel the calmness of the sea outside contradicting the storm building inside the boat. My parents waved as we approached. Dad's smile was tight, almost rehearsed. Mom's hand lingered on the railing, her fingers tense. Something about the way they greeted us, the pauses, the forced lightness, made my stomach twist. "Jamie, say hello," Mom said, her voice sweet but strained. Jamie ran forward, hugging her briefly, oblivious to the tension. I stepped aboard, scanning every corner. The cabin was small and orderly, too orderly, as if every item had been deliberately placed to impress or intimidate. We settled on the deck with sandwiches and lemonade. Dad asked casual questions about my job, then about school projects and homework. I answered politely, keeping my voice even, trying not to betray the unease I felt. But there were little jabs between the questions, subtle reminders of their opinions of me. "You know, Tessa, it might have been easier if you had just listened when we offered help," Dad said casually, cutting a sandwich in half. I froze, heart thudding. I glanced at Jamie, who was happily eating his sandwich, oblivious to the tension thickening the air. "Mommy, why does Grandpa sound so mad?" he asked softly. My throat tightened. How could I explain this without scaring him? I smiled, forcing calm. "Oh, he's just worried about us," I said, brushing my hair from my face. "You know, adults sometimes worry a lot." Jamie nodded, but I knew he didn't really understand. As the boat moved further from the marina, the sunlight reflecting off the gentle waves, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were no longer on a simple family outing. I noticed the way my parents' eyes shifted whenever I moved or spoke. They seemed to be observing me, measuring, calculating. Each question about my work or life felt like a test, not a conversation. Then Mom suggested we check the life jackets, using a tone so casual it was almost chilling. "Just a quick safety check," she said. "We wouldn't want anything to happen to you or Jamie." I followed her instructions, the chill in her words clashing with the sunny afternoon. As I inspected the jackets, I realized my hands were shaking, not from fear of water, but from the realization that this weekend might not be as innocent as it seemed. The suggestion felt like a warning, a subtle statement that they had control over how this day would unfold. Jamie tried to play with the ropes near the edge of the deck, pretending they were treasure lines on a pirate ship. I smiled weakly, ruffling his hair, but my eyes kept flicking to my parents. Each moment I tried to relax, I caught their glances, Dad's subtle nod to Mom, her small, satisfied smile, when I complied with some minor task. Something was off, but I couldn't yet name it. Lunch ended, and Dad suggested a short walk along the deck to enjoy the wind. I followed, holding Jamie's hand tightly. The sun was bright on our backs, waves lapping against the hull. From a distance, it all looked picturesque, but the calm beauty of the scene made the tension more unbearable. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, not just as family, but as subjects under scrutiny, tested for obedience and patience. Mom leaned casually against the railing, watching Jamie run ahead a few steps. "You know, Tessa," she said lightly, "it's good to see how responsible you are with him. But sometimes responsibility means making hard choices, choices you might not like." Her tone was soft, but the meaning behind it landed like a stone in my chest. I swallowed hard, keeping my voice even. "I try my best," I said, but even as I said it, I knew she wasn't complimenting me. She was setting the stage, hinting at a lesson I hadn't asked to learn. As the afternoon went on, small incidents began to accumulate. Dad asked me to grab a towel from the cabin while Jamie watched. I obeyed, and Mom's satisfied glance followed me. Later, when Jamie dropped a juice cup, Mom didn't correct him gently. She let him pick it up while she watched, a quiet test of patience and composure. Each subtle maneuver built a tension that made my skin crawl, a quiet reminder that this trip wasn't about family fun, it was about control. By late afternoon, I realized that every movement, every conversation was layered. My parents weren't here to relax. They were here to observe, to judge, to ensure I knew that no matter how much I thought I was independent, I was still under their control. The feeling was suffocating. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, and the golden light on the water only made the contrast sharper, the calm sea masking the storm between us. Jamie tugged at my sleeve, pointing to a small sailboat passing nearby. "Look, Mommy, a pirate ship," he exclaimed. I laughed softly, forcing warmth into my voice, but inside I felt the tightening grip of fear and unease. This wasn't about pirates. It was about survival, about navigating a weekend where the people who were supposed to love us had quietly turned the rules of safety and family upside down. As we prepared to anchor near a quiet cove, Dad handed Jamie a small snack. "Here, try to stay calm," he said lightly, as if acknowledging that something might go wrong, but in reality, I could tell by his eyes that he already knew exactly how the weekend would unfold. The casual words masked an edge, a challenge that I could feel vibrating through the air. And in that moment, I understood something crystal clear. This weekend was a trap. What had seemed like a simple, sunny outing had been carefully orchestrated. Every comment, every glance, every instruction had been calculated to test me, to measure my patience, to see how far my parents could push me. And Jamie, I looked at Jamie, laughing softly at the waves, completely unaware of the danger and manipulation around him. My heart ached. I had to stay calm, for him and for myself. Every instinct screamed that I needed to protect him, and that instinct would guide everything that came next. By the time the sun began its slow descent, casting orange streaks across the water, I knew there was no going back. The trap was set, the stage arranged, and we were right in the middle of it. And though I didn't know yet exactly what would happen, one thing was certain. This weekend would change everything. The sun had begun its descent, painting the water in streaks of amber and gold, but the warmth on my skin did little to soothe the tight knot in my chest. I could feel it there, coiling tighter with every measured glance from my parents. I held Jamie's hand a little firmer, sensing the weight of his small fingers pressing into mine. For a moment, I let myself watch the gentle waves, trying to convince myself that it was just a normal afternoon, that my fears were misplaced. But the tension lingering in the air was undeniable, and my instincts screamed that the weekend had shifted from awkward control to something far more deliberate. Mom's voice cut through the quiet, light and almost teasing, but carrying an edge I couldn't ignore. You know, Tessa, it's important for children to see how their parents handle responsibility. And for adults too, I suppose. She let the words hang, her eyes glinting as if daring me to react. I frowned, but before I could respond, Dad leaned closer, casually brushing past me as he adjusted the sunshade. The closeness wasn't threatening physically, but it was the kind of deliberate invasion that made your skin crawl, a subtle assertion of dominance. Jamie tugged at my sleeve, nervously. "Mommy, are they mad at us?" he whispered. I shook my head, forcing a tight smile. "No, baby, they're just talking," I said, hoping my voice sounded casual enough that he wouldn't notice the trembling beneath it. Dad's next words landed like a hammer. "Tessa, we've done a lot for you over the years," he said, voice low and deliberate. "It's only fair we expect some acknowledgement of that effort. You can't just ignore what we've provided." I froze, feeling a hot surge of anger mixed with a twisting sense of fear. My independence, the very thing I had fought for all my adult life, was suddenly being judged, not as a success, but as a liability. Jamie looked up at me with wide eyes, sensing the tension before I even had a chance to shield him. I swallowed hard, forcing calm, but inside my heart pounded. Mom moved closer as well, her posture almost casual, but the small flicker in her eyes revealed the calculation beneath. "We only want to make sure you understand the consequences of your decisions," she said sweetly, almost too sweetly. "You can't just drift along thinking the world owes you anything, especially when it comes to family." I stiffened. My hands gripped Jamie's fingers tighter, needing something tangible to hold on to as my mind tried to process her words. It wasn't just a lecture, it was a warning. Every word, every measured pause, felt designed to test me, to see how far they could push before I broke. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I understand," I said cautiously. "I've always appreciated everything you've done." My words sounded hollow even to me. They were carefully neutral, designed to avoid triggering whatever game my parents were playing, yet I could feel the simmering tension in their eyes. They knew I was aware of the undertone, and perhaps that awareness was exactly what they wanted to exploit. For a moment, silence fell, and the yacht rocked gently over the rippling water. Jamie squirmed beside me, tugging at my sleeve again, and I leaned down to whisper, "Just stay close to me, okay?" He nodded, eyes wide, and pressed himself against my side. The bond between us felt like a fragile shield against the uncertainty around us, a tether to reality while the rest of the world seemed to tilt on an uneven axis. Dad cleared his throat and leaned back, pretending casualness, but there was a sharpness beneath his words that made my stomach churn. "It's time for you to prove you can handle challenges on your own," he said. "We've been patient, Tessa, but it's time to see if you're really ready to take responsibility, not just talk about it." My mind raced. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but the implication hit me instantly. There was an intention here, something deliberate and chilling. My parents were no longer hiding behind polite lectures or veiled criticism. They were actively testing me, pushing me towards something I wasn't ready to face, yet couldn't escape. Mom's eyes met mine, calm but unnerving. "Don't worry, sweetie. It's not dangerous. We just want to see how you handle real pressure." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was a tension in her jaw, a controlled precision that left no room for argument. My throat felt dry. I forced a nod, knowing that resistance might provoke a reaction I couldn't predict. Jamie tugged at my hand again, sensing my unease. "Mommy, what kind of pressure?" His voice was small, innocent, but it cut through the fog of tension like a knife. I knelt down to him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "It's nothing scary, baby," I said, trying to convince both him and myself. "Just a little test, like when you practice reading or tying your shoes. You know how you feel proud when you do it right? It's like that." He nodded, but the small quiver in his lips betrayed his nervousness. I felt a surge of protectiveness, so intense it almost blinded me. No matter what my parents were planning, I couldn't let Jamie feel afraid. Dad's next move was subtle but effective. He gestured to the edge of the deck, where the water lapped gently against the hull. "Step over here. Tessa, let's see how well you can manage a situation outside your comfort zone." My heart stuttered. I looked at him, my pulse hammering. "Outside my comfort zone?" I asked cautiously. His expression was neutral, almost clinical. "It's just a simple task," he said. "A step to show responsibility. You'll handle it." I glanced down at the water. The calm surface was deceptive, glinting gold in the sunlight. My mind raced through all the possible scenarios. What was this task? Was it a test of bravery, obedience, or something else? Every instinct screamed that this wasn't ordinary. Jamie pressed his face against my leg, seeking reassurance. "Mommy, I don't want to," he whispered. His voice was small, trembling, and I felt my chest tighten in response. I knelt beside him. "I know, baby, I know it seems scary, but I promise I won't let anything happen to you." I could feel the heat of his body through the fabric of our clothes, the small, rapid movements of his fingers gripping mine. My heart ached for him, for the innocents being forced into the shadow of their manipulations. At that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about control or punishment. It was about power. They weren't testing survival or skill. They were testing fear, obedience, and compliance. Mom's calm voice interrupted my thoughts. "It's not so bad," she said, her tone deceptively cheerful. "Just a little step. You've handled so much in life already. This will be easy." Her eyes flicked toward Dad briefly, and I caught the almost imperceptible nod between them, a silent communication that confirmed my worst suspicion. This had been planned. Every smile, every gentle word, every suggestion about responsibility was part of a deliberate setup to push us toward the edge. I forced a calm breath, trying to steady myself. "Okay, just a little step," I said, my voice betraying only a hint of nervousness. Jamie hesitated, glancing at the water as if it were a living thing, threatening and unpredictable. I could feel his pulse against my fingers, rapid and anxious. I leaned down, keeping my body close to him, and whispered, "We'll do it together. I'm right here. No one can hurt us." The movement toward the deck's edge was slow, deliberate. Every step I took, every glance I cast at my parents, made my stomach churn. Dad's expression was calm, almost neutral, but there was a hard line around his mouth that spoke volumes. Mom's posture remained casual, yet her eyes glimmered with anticipation, as if she were observing a show she had choreographed perfectly. When we reached the edge, Dad's hand hovered near Jamie's back, but he didn't touch him. The air was filled with a silence that was both oppressive and sharp. The water below shimmered, calm yet threatening in its unpredictability. I knelt beside Jamie, holding his tiny hands tightly. My own pulse was frantic, but I forced myself to breathe steadily, whispering encouragements to him while trying to mask the surge of fear inside me. "Just trust me, Jamie," I said. "You're safe as long as you stay with me. Nothing's going to happen. I promise." His small nod and the way he pressed his cheek against my arm was enough to steel my resolve. Whatever my parents had planned, I would face it with him. Together. Mom stepped closer, smiling as she watched. "See? Nothing to it," she said lightly, but the softness of her words was deceptive. Every movement, every subtle glance between her and Dad revealed a carefully orchestrated game. I realized in that moment that their intention wasn't simply to teach or guide. It was to assert dominance, to see fear reflected in our faces. And now, the real test was about to begin. The moment Dad's hand pressed against my shoulder and guided me and Jamie toward the edge, time seemed to slow. The yacht rocked gently beneath our feet, the hum of the engine blending with the soft slap of water against the hull. My heart felt like it might burst, my lungs tightening as adrenaline surged through me. I realized instantly that this wasn't a test I could reason my way through. This was survival, and it was up to me to keep my son alive. "Jamie, stay right with me," I whispered, gripping his small hands with both of mine. His eyes were wide, shimmering with the reflected sunlight and fear. "I won't let anything happen to you. I promise." His little nod barely reassured me, and I could feel the quiver in his fingers. Dad stepped back, his expression calm, almost clinical, and Mom remained at the railing, smiling lightly but with a calculated precision that made my stomach twist. This wasn't a mistake or a lapse in judgment. They had planned every word, every glance, every subtle push. My mind raced. How had it come to this? How had the people who promised love and care become orchestrators of danger for the sake of control? The first step into the water sent a shock through my body. The chill was sharper than I had anticipated, stealing my breath for a moment. Jamie gasped, clutching me, and I tightened my arms around him, instinctively shielding him from the cold. I could feel his small body trembling against mine, a fragile vessel in the midst of something I had never imagined facing. Every instinct in me screamed to panic, but I forced myself to slow my breathing, to focus. I scanned the horizon, searching for something, anything that could serve as a lifeline. Other boats floated lazily in the distance, families laughing and oblivious to the drama unfolding just meters away. My parents' yacht loomed behind us, silent but assertive in its purpose, a reminder that escape wasn't as simple as stepping away. I tried to gauge the distance to the nearest dock, calculating mentally how long it would take for Jamie and me to reach it, how long my strength could last before the cold began to sap my energy. Jamie whimpered softly, his tiny voice barely audible over the lap of water against the boat. "Mommy, it's cold," he murmured. My heart clenched, and I hugged him tighter. "I know, baby. I know it's cold. Just keep your arms around me. That's all you have to do," I said, trying to infuse my words with calm I didn't entirely feel. I could feel the muscle tension in his body, every small shiver transmitting through me, and it added weight to every movement I made. The current pulled slightly, subtle but insistent, and I realized the water wasn't as safe as it looked. Small waves lapped at my legs, making it difficult to find a stable footing while the yacht bobbed ominously behind us. I instinctively moved closer to Jamie, wrapping an arm around him as my other hand fended off the gentle but relentless pull of the water. I whispered encouragements as we moved, trying to make a game of it for him, calling the waves friendly water monsters to distract him. He laughed nervously, and that small sound anchored me, giving me a flicker of hope that we could get through this together. Every step forward was a battle. My feet slipped occasionally on the submerged surface, and the force of the water tried to push us sideways. I could feel my pulse in my ears, loud and frantic, the adrenaline mixed with fear, creating a strange, almost surreal clarity. I noticed the subtle glint of the sun on tiny ripples, the way the distant docks stretched across the horizon like a thin promise of safety. I counted silently with each movement, each small victory inching us closer to solid ground. Mom's voice rang out from the yacht, disturbingly cheerful. "Good job, Tessa. Keep moving." She clapped lightly, but there was a tone underneath it, a pressure that made my stomach turn. It wasn't encouragement. It was taunting, an assertion of control over a situation she engineered entirely. I felt a rush of anger, but there was no room for indulgence. My focus had to remain on Jamie, on keeping his small body from succumbing to fear or cold. I looked down at him. His small chin was trembling, and his tiny fists gripped my shirt. "Mommy, I can't," he whispered. My heart shattered at the sound. "Yes, you can, baby," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I know it's scary, but you're doing it. Look at how brave you are. I'm right here. I won't let go." I could feel the tears threatening to fall, but I swallowed hard. Any crack in my composure would reflect fear to Jamie, and I couldn't allow that. The waves grew slightly stronger as the wind picked up. A sudden gust pushed against my body, rocking me sideways. Jamie screamed briefly, startled, and I caught him instinctively, hugging him tightly. I realized then that physical closeness was our lifeline, not just for warmth, but for psychological safety. Every heartbeat, every whispered reassurance, every gentle touch was keeping him tethered to calm, to trust. I noticed the subtle tension in my own muscles, the way my legs shook from exertion. This wasn't just a test of courage for Jamie. It was a test of my endurance, my ability to manage panic, and my capacity to stay rational under extreme stress. I felt a flicker of pride that I hadn't fully given myself credit for. I wasn't sure what my parents had hoped to accomplish, but they had underestimated one thing: the ferocity of a mother protecting her child. As we pressed forward, a small boat passed nearby. I waved frantically, hoping someone would notice our struggle. The occupants glanced at us briefly, but continued on, assuming perhaps that we were just playing or enjoying the water. Their oblivion only heightened my sense of isolation, the realization that this wasn't a drill, wasn't a minor lesson in responsibility. It was a deliberate act of danger, and no one was coming to help. I felt a mix of desperation and determination surge through me. Jamie's small legs were tiring, and his grip weakened momentarily. "Hold on tight, baby. That's it, just a little more," I said, my voice both firm and soothing. He pressed closer, and I wrapped both arms around him, ensuring that no slip could occur. I moved with deliberate care, each step a negotiation with the water, each breath a reminder that giving in to fear could cost us everything. The yacht's shadow loomed larger now, ominous despite the distance. I could feel their eyes on us even from this far away, observing, measuring, anticipating our reactions. It struck me as chilling how detached they were, how clinical the entire setup had been. I realized fully then that their version of family lessons was warped, twisted into a performance of fear and compliance. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined, and yet every ounce of it was being channeled into my determination to protect Jamie. A sudden wave knocked against my legs, and I stumbled slightly, letting out a sharp breath. Jamie screamed, startled, but I steadied us immediately. "It's okay. I've got you. We're okay." My voice was steady, commanding, more a shield than an explanation. The repeated reassurance, the constant presence, became our anchor, and slowly I saw him begin to trust that we could make it together. Minutes stretched like hours, each movement forward testing both body and mind. The subtle wind shifts, the small eddies in the water, the glint of sunlight off tiny waves, all became obstacles I had to calculate in real time. I realized that this wasn't just a physical battle, it was a mental one. I had to manage fear, predict hazards, and maintain Jamie's morale simultaneously. Any lapse could tip the balance, and I couldn't afford even a second of distraction. I remembered our swimming lessons, the ones I had taken seriously even though Jamie often complained about them. Those lessons now became crucial. I repositioned him against my chest, keeping his head above water, using every small technique I had learned to reduce drag and maintain balance. My own muscles burned from the strain, but there was no room for complaint, only action. "Almost there, Jamie," I whispered, seeing the faint outline of a dock up ahead. He shivered against me, his body small and fragile, yet holding on. The sight of solid ground, even distant, spurred me onward. Every step was a negotiation with the water, every breath a measure of endurance. I could hear Mom's distant voice again, faintly taunting. "Keep going, Tessa. You're doing well." But this time, I didn't let it faze me. My focus was singular, survival and my son's safety. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, our feet found something solid. A small, uneven dock welcomed us, cold and wet beneath our soaked clothing. I held Jamie tightly against me, letting him collapse slightly in relief. He shivered violently, but his eyes met mine, filled with trust and a glimmer of pride. "We did it, Mommy," he whispered. I nodded, tears threatening, and whispered back, "Yes, baby, we did it together." I looked back at the yacht. My parents' smiles were gone, replaced by an expression of surprise, perhaps even frustration. They had expected compliance, fear, maybe even tears, but not this, not the unwavering determination of a mother protecting her child. And in that moment, I realized that the power dynamic had shifted. Their calculated plan had failed. The moment my feet hit solid ground, I thought we had escaped the danger. My body shook violently, the cold still clinging to my wet clothes, and Jamie's small frame trembled against me. I wrapped him in a borrowed towel from the dock's supply box, trying to warm him up, but relief was fleeting. Even as we huddled together, exhausted and dripping, I felt a gnawing unease that went far beyond the chill of the water or the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. Something about that weekend had shifted, and my gut told me the story was far from over. Back in my car, I dried Jamie's hair and wrapped him in a blanket. He looked sleepy, his eyelids heavy, but every so often he shivered and whispered, "Mommy, why did they do that?" I kissed the top of his head and held him close. "I don't know, baby, but I promise you we're safe now. That's what matters." I wanted to believe it, but the nagging feeling of betrayal wouldn't leave me. My parents' smiles, their carefully chosen words, the way they had orchestrated every move, it wasn't just cruelty. It was deliberate. The call from my lawyer came an hour later, and my hands shook as I picked up the phone. The office line felt foreign, almost too normal, in contrast to the chaos of the afternoon. "Tessa," the lawyer's voice said, calm and professional, "I need to discuss something urgent regarding your parents' estate. It appears there have been some changes you need to see immediately." My heart skipped a beat. Changes? I repeated, barely keeping my voice steady. What kind of changes? Legal documents have been altered. The lawyer said, carefully, some wills, property transfers, and financial accounts. It looks like your parents have made arrangements that exclude you from portions of the estate you were previously entitled to. My blood ran cold. I had suspected manipulation, but seeing it in black and white legal language made it visceral, undeniable. My parents hadn't just tried to intimidate me on the yacht. They had been quietly orchestrating a plan to cut me out of my family's legacy, leveraging inheritance as a weapon. Every subtle jab, every test of obedience over the weekend suddenly made sense. The yacht incident had been more than a display of control. It had been a prelude, a test of whether I would comply without resistance. I took a deep, shuddering breath and looked at Jamie, who was still half asleep in my lap. He stirred slightly and whispered, "Mommy, are they bad?" The word hit me harder than I expected. "No, baby," I murmured, forcing a calm tone. "They made some very poor choices, but we're okay. We're together, and that's what matters." I had to mask my anger and betrayal for him, but inside, a fire had begun to burn, a need for clarity, for accountability, and for justice. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, legal papers spread across every available surface. My fingers traced the lines of signatures, notarizations, and clauses that had been added or changed without my knowledge. Each document told a story of premeditation, a deliberate exclusion that was designed to hurt me, to assert control long after the yacht incident. My parents weren't merely disappointed in me. They had weaponized every ounce of their power to manipulate my life and my son's future. I noticed small details that had gone unnoticed before. The way Mom had subtly steered conversations toward responsibility and obedience, the way Dad had insisted on proximity when directing us on the deck. Those weren't random acts. They were psychological conditioning, a rehearsal for the emotional shock they had planned to land on me once the legal documents were in place. The realization made my skin crawl. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was calculated, deliberate, and unrelenting. That evening, I went to the kitchen to make tea, Jamie following me with his tiny, cautious steps. He perched on the counter, rubbing his small hands together as if trying to warm them from the inside. "Mommy, do they hate us?" he asked quietly. I knelt to meet his gaze, forcing calm into my eyes, even though my chest felt like it might explode with anger. "No, honey, they're just confused. Sometimes adults make terrible choices, but we won't let that define us. We're stronger than that." As I sipped my tea, I remembered the way Dad had leaned close on the yacht, his voice low and measured, words that now seemed like threats disguised as lessons. And Mom, smiling lightly, observing every move, she had known exactly how far to push, how much fear to instill. This wasn't about adventure or responsibility. This was about control and exclusion, and suddenly everything clicked into place. I began to gather evidence meticulously, emails, text messages, and even the small notes they had left for me over the years became pieces of a puzzle I had only now realized existed. My parents had carefully documented expectations, boundaries, and rules that were impossible to meet, designed to catch me in failure. Each thread reinforced a larger picture. They had planned the yacht incident, the subtle manipulations, and the legal exclusion as one orchestrated attack on my independence. The more I dug, the clearer it became. Mom had been quietly revising financial documents, while Dad had ensured that every property transfer reflected exclusionary clauses. The yacht had been the rehearsal, testing my reactions, my compliance, and my instinct to protect Jamie. And now, the inheritance revealed the full extent of their betrayal. It wasn't a moment of thoughtlessness. It was a long-term plan to exert control, with emotional abuse carefully masked as concern and guidance. Jamie curled against me, holding his blanket, still half asleep but sensing my tension. "Mommy, will they come here?" he asked softly. I held him closer, letting him feel the steadiness in my arms. "No, baby, they can't. We're safe here," I said, even as my mind spun with possibilities. The realization that I had to act decisively for both our safety became crystal clear. Survival wasn't just about physical danger anymore. It was about reclaiming our lives, our future, and our sense of security. That night, I barely slept. Every time my eyes closed, I saw the yacht, the glint of sunlight on the water, my parents' calm but calculated expressions. I saw the legal documents, each line of exclusion like a dagger. The combined memory of fear and betrayal made sleep impossible. Instead, I planned, thought, and strategized. There was no room for panic, only action. Every detail mattered: which documents to contest, how to approach the lawyer, and most importantly, how to protect Jamie from the emotional fallout. The next morning, I called the lawyer again, gathering specifics about the altered documents. Each explanation confirmed my suspicions. Dad had transferred certain property rights to other family members or trusts, bypassing me entirely. Mom had added clauses that could restrict Jamie's inheritance in the future if I resisted their authority. It was meticulous, precise, and calculated. The yacht incident had been their test, but the legal changes were their weapon. The magnitude of their betrayal hit me like a punch to the chest, but alongside it came a clarity I hadn't had before. I knew I had to confront this head-on, but not impulsively. Any move had to be measured, deliberate, and backed with evidence. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was legal, psychological, and strategic. I began organizing files, cross-referencing emails and texts with the legal documents. Small, seemingly insignificant details began to form patterns. Casual remarks about responsibility, instructions masked as guidance, comments about inheritance during conversations. It was all connected, a web I could now trace with precision. Jamie watched me quietly from the corner of the living room, sensing the gravity of the situation. "Mommy, are they going to be mad?" he asked softly. I knelt beside him, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "They may be upset because we're standing up for ourselves," I said carefully, "but we're doing the right thing. Nothing can take away our love, our safety, or our courage." His small hands gripped mine, and I realized then that this fight wasn't just about inheritance. It was about our future, our bond, and the integrity of our family, on our terms. By mid-afternoon, I had compiled a folder thick with documents, the altered wills, property transfers, notarized statements, and a record of their communications. Each piece added weight to the revelation, proving that the yacht incident had been far more than a scare. It had been a rehearsal for this larger betrayal. I felt a surge of empowerment, a strange mix of relief and righteous anger. My parents had tried to use fear to control me. Instead, their actions had ignited a fierce determination I had never known before. For the first time that day, I allowed myself a deep, steady breath. Jamie sat beside me, slowly regaining his playful energy, asking questions about his favorite cartoons and snack ideas. I answered, but my mind remained alert, reviewing strategies for addressing the legal betrayal, thinking ahead to the confrontation that might come. Even in the midst of exhaustion and fear, I realized that we had survived the immediate danger on the yacht, and now we were equipped to face the hidden, lingering threat of manipulation through inheritance. By evening, I had contacted a financial advisor and a second legal expert to review everything thoroughly. Each confirmation added another layer of validation, making the reality undeniable. My parents had intentionally created a framework to exclude me and Jamie. The yacht, the words, the careful tests. It all made sense now. The betrayal had been years in the making, and it wasn't just a moment of recklessness. It was a long-term strategy to maintain control, to punish independence, and to assert dominance even when I thought I had escaped. The days after uncovering the full betrayal felt like waking from a long, suffocating fog. Jamie and I had returned to our small apartment, the walls plain and familiar, yet suddenly brimming with possibility. It was quiet here, not the yacht, not my parents' calculated gaze, but quiet in a way that demanded reflection. I watched Jamie curl up with his favorite stuffed bear, humming softly as he traced patterns on the carpet. He was safe for the first time in hours, maybe days, maybe longer. And yet, I knew that reclaiming our freedom meant more than physical safety. It meant taking back the emotional ground they had tried to strip from us. I started with the documents, arranging everything on the kitchen table. The lawyer had already begun drafting countermeasures, challenging the clauses and exclusions my parents had orchestrated. But the fight wasn't purely legal, it was personal. And I realized that reclaiming life meant asserting control in every corner of my world. I had to start small, from the way we organized our days to how I handled interactions with my parents moving forward. Jamie needed stability, and I needed clarity. The first morning alone, I made breakfast like a ritual: pancakes with blueberries, scrambled eggs on the side, orange juice for Jamie. The smell filled the apartment, warm and ordinary, but it carried a strange weight of defiance. I reminded myself that these simple acts, feeding him, comforting him, laughing at his little jokes, were a form of reclaiming control. For too long, our lives had been dictated by the whims of people who claimed to love us but had only used fear as a tool. Now, every ordinary action was an assertion of freedom. Jamie chattered nonstop during breakfast. "Mommy, do you think Grandpa and Grandma will be mad?" His voice held a mix of curiosity and lingering fear. I smiled softly, reaching across the table to ruffle his hair. "They might be upset, baby," I said gently, "but it doesn't matter. We're okay. We're together. And that's what counts." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, but I could see the slight tension in his shoulders, the remnants of anxiety. I knew it would take time for him to feel fully safe again. And I also knew it would take time for me. That day, I made a list: steps to reclaim control over our lives. First, secure finances and legal documents. Second, rebuild emotional boundaries. Third, reestablish routines that gave Jamie stability and joy. Fourth, strengthen support systems, friends, counselors, and professionals who could offer guidance. And fifth, assert independence in the face of my parents' manipulations. Each point was a strategy for survival and empowerment. I realized that reclaiming life wasn't a single act. It was an ongoing process, layered and deliberate. The first call I made was to my old friend, Hannah. She had always been a grounding presence, someone who could see through the fog of family drama. "Hannah," I said, my voice shaky but determined, "I need your help. It's complicated. My parents, they tried to hurt me, and I don't want Jamie to feel unsafe." Hannah didn't flinch. "Tessa, I'm here. We'll get through this together." Her calm assurance grounded me. I realized that reclaiming life meant surrounding ourselves with allies, people who understood our reality and could help rebuild our sense of normalcy. Over the next few days, we tackled the small victories. I took Jamie to the park, letting him run freely on the swings and slides. I watched him laugh without fear, and it felt like the first time in ages that I could breathe without the weight of their eyes pressing on my chest. The sun warmed our faces, and I marveled at the simplicity of it. Freedom didn't come from grand gestures. It came from moments like these, moments where we could exist without manipulation or expectation. But the shadow of betrayal wasn't gone. I still had to deal with the legal side, and every document reminded me of how deep the manipulation ran. My parents hadn't just tried to frighten us, they had attempted to erase our place in the family legacy. The inheritance had been their weapon, wielded silently over years, and confronting it required both strategy and courage. I spent hours with my lawyer, reviewing options, planning steps, and preparing contingencies. Every clause I contested, every document I challenged, felt like a reclaiming of power that had been stolen. One afternoon, as I reviewed an account of property transfers, Jamie curled up beside me with a coloring book. "Mommy, can we color together?" he asked softly. I smiled, setting the papers aside. "Of course, baby." We spent the next hour lost in crayons and scribbles, laughing when colors went outside the lines. In those small moments, I understood the deeper meaning of reclaiming freedom. It wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about creating a world where Jamie and I could exist without fear, where he could be a child without calculating every word or glance for danger. The emotional rebuilding was harder than the legal work. I had to confront my own anger, the sense of betrayal, and the creeping doubt that perhaps I hadn't been strong enough before. Each night, I lay awake, replaying moments from the yacht, the water my parents' calculated glances. The adrenaline of survival had faded, leaving the raw ache of trauma. I sought counseling, both for myself and for Jamie, knowing that emotional recovery was as vital as physical and legal security. The sessions were slow and demanding, forcing me to confront feelings I had buried under fear and responsibility. But each breakthrough, each acknowledgement of pain, was a step toward reclaiming life. I also realized that reclaiming freedom meant establishing boundaries with my parents. Phone calls were now carefully controlled. Visits required advance notice and clear expectations. I refused to be manipulated through guilt or emotional pressure. When Dad called, I answered calmly, stating the purpose and duration of the conversation. When Mom sent a text laden with subtle criticism, I paused before responding, choosing words that asserted control rather than compliance. It was a new language for me, one that emphasized self-respect and protection over obedience. Small acts of independence multiplied quickly. I took Jamie to a movie theater, letting him pick the snacks. I enrolled him in a weekend art class he had wanted for months. I even allowed myself a solo walk along the waterfront, breathing deeply, feeling the freedom of movement and thought without supervision or expectation. Each act, however small, reinforced the reality that our lives no longer belonged to my parents' plans. The stolen sense of safety and autonomy was being rebuilt brick by brick, choice by choice. The turning point came one evening when Jamie and I sat on the balcony, watching the sunset. He leaned against me, exhausted but content. "Mommy, I feel happy," he murmured. My heart swelled. "Me too, baby," I whispered. "Me too." I realized then that reclaiming life wasn't a single battle or victory. It was the accumulation of countless small moments where fear was replaced with trust, where control was replaced with choice, where love was reaffirmed not through obligation, but through genuine care and presence. Even with progress, I knew confrontation was inevitable. My parents would continue to test, to probe, to assert influence where possible. But I approached this reality differently now, armed with documentation, legal support, and the clarity that comes from surviving betrayal. I began drafting letters, preparing statements, and planning meetings with professionals who could hold my parents accountable without endangering Jamie. This preparation was empowering. It transformed fear into agency, trauma into strategy. One afternoon, Jamie and I stumbled upon a small community garden near our apartment. He ran ahead, laughing, collecting fallen leaves and petals. I watched him, smiling through tears I hadn't realized had formed. The simple act of walking freely choosing our own path and experiencing the world on our own terms. This was freedom. It wasn't dictated by inherited wealth, manipulation, or fear. It was ours to claim in every step, every choice, every laugh. As weeks passed, the sense of liberation deepened. Jamie's laughter filled the apartment, echoing in corners that had previously been haunted by tension and fear. I began reconnecting with friends I had distanced myself from, creating a support network that reinforced our independence. I celebrated small victories, a cleared legal hurdle, a confident reply to my parents' probing questions, a day spent entirely without fear of judgment or retaliation. Each step reinforced the truth. Life could be reclaimed, but only through conscious, deliberate effort. And in the quiet moments when Jamie slept peacefully, I reflected on the journey. The betrayal, the fear, the manipulations, all of it had forced me to confront the deepest parts of my own resilience. I realized that reclaiming life and freedom wasn't just about removing threats. It was about cultivating strength, courage, and independence that no one could take away. My parents had tried to control us through fear, through inheritance, through subtle psychological pressure, but they had failed. I had survived, protected Jamie, and rebuilt a life that was ours, untainted by their schemes. Finally, the day came when I held the first legal documents in my hands confirming the reversal of unfair clauses and the protection of Jamie's future. Relief surged through me, tempered by the lingering knowledge of betrayal. But the most profound freedom wasn't in the documents or the legal victories. It was in the certainty that Jamie and I could live fully, safely, and without fear. We could laugh freely, dream boldly, and navigate life on our own terms. The sun dipped low over the horizon that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and I sat on the porch with Jamie nestled against me, his small arms draped over mine. The apartment was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of distant traffic and the occasional call of a bird returning to its nest. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to breathe fully, unshackled by fear, betrayal, or uncertainty. The waves of anxiety that had gripped me for weeks, the panic that had made my chest tighten on the yacht, the tension in every word exchanged with my parents, the gnawing dread that our place in the world could be taken, had begun to recede. I realized with a clarity that warmed and steadied me that reclaiming our life had never been about legal documents or proving right and wrong. It had been about finding strength in the simplest truths, safety, trust, and love. I watched Jamie swing his legs lazily, tracing patterns on the porch railing with his fingers, humming a tune he had invented. His laughter had returned, quiet at first, then fuller, until it spilled into the room and filled my chest with a warmth I hadn't thought I'd feel again. That laughter was a victory, a tangible reminder that despite the years of manipulation, the orchestrated fear, and the cold calculations of those who were supposed to love us, we had emerged intact. My parents had tried to wield power through fear and inheritance, thinking that compliance or terror could bend me to their will. But they hadn't accounted for one thing: the fierce determination of a mother protecting her child, or the resilience that blooms when love becomes your armor. Every moment we had endured, the icy shock of water, the shiver of fear in Jamie's hands, the weight of betrayal in the documents, had forged a bond between us stronger than any manipulation could sever. I realized that freedom was not a momentary escape. It was the culmination of countless small acts of courage, choice, and defiance. It was the decision to protect Jamie when the world seemed aligned against us, the decision to stand firm when doubt whispered that we couldn't, the decision to rebuild a life one careful step at a time. Looking back, I understood that our ordeal had been more than an attempt at control. It had been a test of character, of resilience, and of love. And we had passed, not because the world had yielded, but because we refused to surrender. As the sky deepened to a rich indigo, and the first stars twinkled overhead, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over us. We were free, not because the past had changed, but because we had claimed the present, and with it the promise of a future unbound by fear. I held Jamie close, whispering softly that he was safe, that he was loved, and that we would face the world together. Always. The journey had been harrowing, the betrayal unforgettable, but the lessons were clear. Strength lies in love, courage is born from protection, and freedom is claimed not with privilege, but with steadfast heart and unyielding will. And in that quiet golden moment, I understood fully our life, reclaimed and fortified by every trial, was ours entirely. No one could take it, and nothing could shake the bond we had forged in fire. We had survived fear, survived betrayal, and emerged stronger than before. In the laughter of my son, in the warmth of his small hand in mine, I finally felt what it truly meant to be free. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to hope without reservation, to dream without fear, and to live wholly, fiercely, and unafraid.